The holographic announcement flickered across every screen in the Galactic Combat Academy's main hall. Students from 17 different species stopped mid-conversation to watch the annual tradition unfold before their eyes. Tournament season had arrived again, and this year's competition promised to be the largest in Academy history. Owen Reed sat in the back corner of the hall, his datapad displaying the same announcement everyone else was watching. He had been at the Academy for 8 months now, one of only 3 humans in a student body of nearly 2,000. Most days he kept to himself, attending classes and spending his evenings in the less crowded sections of the training facilities. His roommate Drev, a Korean with 4 arms and bright orange skin, often joked that Owen was more ghost than student. "You should enter," Drev said, dropping onto the bench beside Owen with enough force to make it shake. "The tournament accepts all skill levels. Even beginners get to participate." Owen looked up from his datapad. "I'm considering it." Drev's 3 eyes widened in surprise. His species had excellent control over facial expressions, and right now, all 3 eyes were showing genuine shock. "You're serious?" "Owen, I've never even seen you in the combat training halls during normal hours. Do you even know how to use a practice saber?" "I know how to use a sword," Owen replied quietly. The distinction seemed lost on Drev, who launched into an explanation of how the tournament worked. Every participant would receive a standardized energy practice saber upon entering the arena. The weapons were carefully calibrated to ensure fairness across all species, accounting for differences in strength, speed, and physical structure. The sabers could register hits without causing actual injury, making the tournament safe for everyone involved. Owen listened politely, though he had already read the tournament regulations 3 times. He had spent the past 2 weeks reviewing every rule, every technical specification, every clause written in the dense legal language that governed interspecies competitions. There was something specific he had been looking for, and he had found it buried in subsection 12 of the equipment guidelines. That evening, Owen made his way to the registration office. The administrator on duty was a tall Torgon named Halvik, whose species took pride in their rigid adherence to rules and procedures. Halvik's scales were a deep bronze color, and his eyes tracked Owen's movements with the precision of someone who missed nothing. "Name and species," Halvik said without looking up from his terminal. "Owen Reed, human." Now Halvik looked up. His vertical pupils narrowed slightly. "Humans rarely participate in martial tournaments. Your species lacks the physical advantages of most competitors. I'd still like to register," Owen said calmly. Halvik processed the registration with mechanical efficiency, explaining the rules in a monotone voice that suggested he had given this speech 10,000 times before. All participants would arrive at the arena on tournament day and receive their practice sabers from the equipment table. No personal weapons were permitted. No modifications to standard equipment were allowed. Victory was determined by registered hits on designated target zones. Owen nodded along, then asked a single question. "What if someone wants to bring a cultural artifact to the opening ceremony? For display purposes?" Halvik consulted his terminal. "Cultural artifacts are permitted in the ceremonial area, provided they meet safety requirements. Submit a request form through the Cultural Affairs Office." Owen thanked him and left. Back in his quarters, Drev found Owen sitting on his bunk with something long and wrapped in dark cloth across his lap. The human was polishing the cloth with careful, almost reverent movements. "What's that?" Drev asked. "Family heirloom," Owen said. "I'm bringing it to the tournament." Drev moved closer, his natural curiosity overcoming his usual respect for privacy. "Can I see it?" Owen hesitated, then carefully unwrapped one end of the cloth. What emerged made Drev take an involuntary step backward. It was a sword, but not like the sleek energy weapons used in modern combat. This was metal, dark and worn, with a blade that caught the light in strange ways. The crossguard was simple but elegant, and the handle was wrapped in material that had clearly been replaced many times over many years. "That's a real weapon," Drev said, his voice uncertain. "Like an actual combat blade. From before your species had energy technology. 400 years old," Owen confirmed. "Passed down through my family for generations." My grandmother taught me how to use it. Drev sat down heavily on his own bunk. His species had abandoned physical weapons 3,000 years ago when they developed their first energy projectors. The idea that humans had kept such primitive technology alive, had actually trained with it and preserved the knowledge, seemed almost incomprehensible. Why? Drev finally asked. Owen ran his hand along the flat of the blade, not touching the edge. Because some things are worth remembering. Some traditions matter. You can't use that in the tournament, Drev said. The rules are very clear about standardized equipment. Owen smiled, a small expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. The rules say all weapons must be of equivalent mass and length to the standard practice saber. They say nothing about what those weapons have to be made of or how old they are. Drev stared at his roommate, understanding dawning slowly across his features. You're not bringing it for display. You're going to fight with it. If they'll let me, Owen said. And according to the regulations, they have to. He wrapped the sword carefully back in its cloth and set it aside. Outside their window, the Academy's twin moons rose over the training fields where, in just 3 days, the tournament would begin. Owen had spent 8 months being underestimated, being dismissed as just another weak human trying to survive in a galaxy of stronger species. 3 days from now, he would show them what humans had been before they reached the stars. 3 days from now, he would honor his grandmother's memory and his family tradition. 3 days from now, they would learn that ancient didn't mean obsolete. Owen's grandmother had been 73 years old when she first placed the long sword in his hands. He remembered the weight of it, how his 12-year-old arms had trembled trying to hold it steady. She had smiled at his struggle and told him that was exactly right. A sword should feel heavy. It should demand respect. Her name had been Diana Reed, and she had been the 7th-generation keeper of the blade in their family. The sword had been forged in the year 2089, back when Earth was still recovering from the resource wars, and old skills were being preserved by anyone who remembered them. A master smith named Takashi Yamada had crafted it in the traditional European style, using techniques that dated back centuries before that. He had given it to Owen's ancestor, a woman who led a community defense force, with the instruction that it should never be forgotten. It never was. Diana had turned her garage into a training hall. 3 times a week after school, Owen would stand in that converted space and learn movements that most of his classmates thought only existed in historical films. She taught him stances, footwork, cutting angles, and binding techniques. She taught him that a sword was not a club or a magic wand. It was a tool that required precision, timing, and above all, respect for its lethal purpose. You're never just swinging metal, she would say, correcting his grip for the 100th time. You're completing a motion that your ancestors perfected through trial and error. Every technique you learn was paid for with someone's blood, someone's life. Honor that. Owen had been 15 when she started teaching him the philosophy behind the techniques. The sword was an extension of the warrior's spirit, she explained. Its balance, its weight distribution, its edge geometry, all of these things were designed to force the wielder in a proper form. Modern training weapons were too forgiving. They let you get away with mistakes. A real sword taught you, through consequence, that by the time Owen was 18, he could perform forms that would have impressed sword masters from any century. Diana had taught him not just European longsword techniques, but adaptations and principles from other traditions as well. Japanese kenjutsu, Chinese jin techniques, even some Middle Eastern safe methods. She believed that all sword arts shared fundamental truths, and a true student should recognize those patterns. Then Diana died, and Owen inherited both the sword and the responsibility that came with it. He remembered standing at her funeral, the longsword displayed beside her photograph, and making a private promise. He would not let the tradition die with her. He would find a way to prove that what she had taught him mattered, that it was more than just romantic nostalgia. For a violent past. 6 months later, the galactic community made first official contact with Earth. 6 months after that, educational exchange programs opened up. Owen applied to the Galactic Combat Academy without telling anyone what he intended to do. Now, sitting in his quarters on a station orbiting a planet 40 light years from home, Owen opened his footlocker and removed the sword case. He had submitted his cultural artifact request that afternoon, carefully wording it to seem like he just wanted to display a piece of human history during the opening ceremonies. The Cultural Affairs Office had approved it without a second thought. Drev watched from his bunk as Owen laid the sword across his lap and began his maintenance routine. Cleaning the blade, checking for any signs of stress in the metal, examining the handle wrapping for wear. It was a ritual Diana had taught him, a way of staying connected to the weapon and noticing small problems before they became big ones. "I've been researching your species' combat history," Drev said suddenly. "Did humans really fight wars with these things?" "For thousands of years," Owen confirmed, working oil into the blade with a soft cloth. "That's insane. You could die from a single mistake." "That's the point," Owen said. "When death is real, when the weapon in your hand can actually kill you if you use it wrong, you develop a different relationship with combat. You learn discipline. You learn respect. You learn that fighting isn't a game." Drev's four arms crossed in a gesture of skepticism. "But we've moved past that. Modern training methods are safer, more efficient. Why hold on to something so dangerous?" Owen paused in his maintenance routine. He looked at the blade, seeing his reflection distorted in the dark metal. "Because safety can make you complacent. Because efficiency can make you forget the cost. My grandmother used to say that every scar on this blade represents a moment when someone made a choice, right or wrong, and had to live with the consequences." He pointed to a small nick near the middle of the blade. "This one is from 2127, when my ancestor used this sword to defend her town from raiders. She survived. The raider didn't." That nick reminds us that sword fighting isn't about looking impressive. It's about survival. Drev uncrossed his arms slowly. "And you think bringing this to a tournament with practice sabers will prove something?" "I think it will show people what we've lost," Owen said. "Everyone at the academy trains with weapons that can't hurt them. They learn techniques, sure, but they don't learn fear. They don't learn caution. They don't learn that every attack you make creates an opening someone can exploit." He finished his maintenance and carefully rewrapped the sword in its cloth. "I spent 8 months watching students here who are faster than me, stronger than me, with better reflexes and more limbs. But they all make the same mistakes. They overextend because there's no punishment for it. They telegraph their moves because they've never faced someone who would kill them for it. And you have." Drev asked quietly. "No," Owen admitted. "But I was trained by someone who understood what combat really means. And I carry a weapon that forces me to remember it with every movement." Outside, the Academy's night cycle dimmed the lights to simulate planetary darkness. Tomorrow, Owen would attend his regular classes, train in private, and continue being the quiet human that everyone overlooked. But in 3 days, he would step into that arena carrying 4 centuries of human tradition and determination. His grandmother had taught him well. Now it was time to show the galaxy what that meant. Tournament day arrived with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the Academy's corridors. Students packed into the main arena, filling seats that rose in curved tiers around the central fighting platform. Species from across the galaxy chatted in dozens of languages, creating a sound like rushing water punctuated by clicks, whistles, and harmonics that human ears weren't designed to process. Owen walked through the competitor entrance carrying his sword case. Other fighters streamed toward the equipment table where officials were distributing the standardized practice sabers. Each weapon glowed with a soft blue light, humming with the contained energy that would register hits without causing injury. The weapons were beautiful in their uniformity, each one identical to the next. Owen walked past the table. Halvik materialized in front of him with the sudden movement typical of the Torgon species. His bronze scales caught the arena lights as he held up one hand in a stopping gesture. "Competitor Reed," Halvik said, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "You must receive your assigned weapon from the equipment table. Personal weapons are not permitted in tournament combat." Owen set his case down carefully and opened it. The long sword lay inside, its dark metal a stark contrast to the glowing practice sabers being distributed behind them. He lifted it with both hands, feeling its familiar weight settle into his grip. "Tournament Regulations, Section 4, Subsection 12. Owen said calmly. Participants may utilize weapons of equivalent mass and length to standard equipment, provided such weapons meet all safety inspection requirements. Halvik's eyes narrowed to slits. That regulation refers to species-specific adaptations for competitors with non-standard physiology, not to primitive, solid metal weapons. The regulation doesn't specify that, Owen replied. It only states equivalent mass and length. I request a formal measurement and inspection. A crowd was forming now. Other competitors had noticed the confrontation, and word was spreading through the arena like fire through dry grass. The human was trying to use a real sword. The human had found a loophole. The human was either brilliant or insane. Three tournament officials arrived with measurement tools and safety scanners. They worked in silence, checking the sword's dimensions against the standard practice saber specifications. Length, mass, balance point, grip circumference. Every measurement fell within the acceptable range. The safety scanners confirmed the blade was sharp but not poisoned, not energized, not carrying any prohibited modifications. Halvik reviewed the measurements 3 times, looking for any discrepancy that would allow him to deny the request. He found nothing. The sword met every technical requirement. This is highly irregular, Halvik said finally. But not illegal, Owen replied. The senior tournament official, a Quellan named Iris, intervened. Her species was known for scholarly wisdom and fair judgment. She examined the sword herself, running one delicate finger along the flat of the blade without touching the edge. The weapon meets all stated requirements, Iris declared. The competitor may proceed. The arena erupted in noise. Half the crowd seemed to be laughing, the other half arguing. The idea that someone would bring an ancient, primitive weapon to a modern tournament struck most species as either comedy or insanity. Humans were already considered one of the weaker species in the galactic community. This just confirmed their backward nature. Owen's first opponent was already waiting on the platform. Tess was VRYNN, a species whose evolutionary path had favored speed over strength. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, but weighed less than Owen, her limbs long and graceful. In each hand, she held a practice saber that seemed to be an extension of her body, moving in small circles as she warmed up. The VRYNN were proud of their martial traditions. They had been fighting duels for honor and status for 5,000 years, and they considered themselves the finest sword masters in the known galaxy. Tess had won 12 consecutive matches in previous tournaments. She looked at Owen's long sword, and her expression was pure amusement. "A museum piece," she said, her voice carrying across the platform. "How charming. Try not to hurt yourself, human." The referee, a neutral third party from a species that didn't compete, signaled the start of the match. Tess moved like lightning. Her sabers blurred into motion, cutting angles that should have been impossible, attacking from directions that seemed to defy geometry. She was fast, faster than anything Owen had ever faced in training. Her blades hummed through the air in a pattern designed to overwhelm and confuse. Owen didn't try to match her speed. He couldn't. Instead, he did what his grandmother had taught him. He watched the pattern. Every attack, no matter how fast, followed principles of leverage and momentum. Every strike came from somewhere and ended somewhere. All he had to do was not be in those places. His long sword moved in simple, economical motions. Parry, redirect, sidestep. Parry, redirect, sidestep. The ancient techniques were designed for real combat where a single mistake meant death. They emphasized efficiency over flash, survival over scoring points. Tess's confidence began to crack as her attacks found only air or steel. She increased her speed, her sabers becoming a continuous blur of blue light. The crowd was on its feet now, watching the impossible. The slow human was defending against the fastest species in the arena. Owen saw his opening. Tess had overextended on a high cut, committing too much of her weight forward. It was a mistake no one would make if the weapons were real, because that mistake would be fatal. But practice sabers had taught her she could get away with it. His long sword swept up in a classical rising cut, catching both her sabers at the bind point. The leverage was wrong for her. The weight of his blade, too much for her to redirect. He continued the motion, controlling her weapons with the physics of 400 years of metallurgical perfection, and stepped inside her guard. The tip of his sword touched her shoulder with the gentleness of a feather. The arena fell silent. The referee's voice cut through the quiet. Hit registered. Victory to competitor Reed. Owen stepped back and bowed to Tess, a gesture his grandmother had taught him. Always respect your opponent, she had said. They gave you the gift of testing your skills. Tess stared at him, her sabers lowering slowly. How did you do that? Practice, Owen said quietly. A lot of practice. He walked off the platform, carrying his long sword while the crowd erupted into arguments and debates. Most of them still thought it was luck. One match proved nothing. Owen smiled to himself. He had 5 more matches to change their minds. News of Owen's victory spread through the academy faster than official announcements could travel. By the time the second round of matches began, every screen in the facility was showing replays of the human with the ancient sword defeating the VRYNN speed champion. Combat instructors huddled in groups, analyzing the footage frame by frame, trying to understand what they had witnessed. Drev found Owen in the competitor waiting area, sitting alone on a bench with a long sword resting across his knees. His roommate's 4 arms were full of water containers and nutrition packets, emergency supplies for what he clearly expected to be a long discussion. Half the school thinks you cheated, Drev said, dropping onto the bench beside Owen. The other half thinks Tess just had a bad day. Nobody believes you won fairly. I know, Owen said. He was wiping down the blade with his maintenance cloth, checking for any microscopic damage. There was none. The sword had been forged to withstand real combat. A few impacts with practice sabers wouldn't even register. Your next opponent is Braun, Drev continued. He's Durnak. Do you know anything about them? They prefer heavy armor and overwhelming force, Owen said. Their fighting style is based on the idea that the best defense is being too tough to hurt. Drev's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. Exactly. And Braun has never lost a match to someone who relies on speed or precision. You just outlast them. How are you going to deal with that? Owen smiled and continued his blade maintenance. The same way humans have always dealt with armored opponents, by remembering that armor has gaps. The match was called 20 minutes later. Owen walked onto the platform to find Braun already waiting, and the sight was impressive. The Durnak stood almost 8 feet tall and nearly 5 feet wide, his body covered in segmented armor plates that were part of his natural biology. His practice sabers looked like toys in his massive hands, but the way he moved showed they were anything but. Braun looked down at Owen and the ancient longsword, and his laugh rumbled like falling rocks. The human with the antique. I heard about you. Let's see how your little blade works against real protection. The referee signaled the start. Braun charged like a battering ram, his massive body picking up speed with terrifying momentum. Most opponents would have dodged, tried to use mobility against his size. But Owen had studied armor combat. He knew that dodging just delayed the inevitable. Eventually, Braun would corner him, and then it would be over. Instead, Owen did something that made the crowd gasp. He charged directly toward Braun at the last second. He dropped low and slid past Braun's leading leg. His long sword moved in a precise arc, the tip finding the gap between 2 armor plates at the knee joint. The practice saber's energy field registered a hit in a critical mobility zone. Braun stumbled, surprised, but his armor kept him upright. He spun faster than something his size should have been able to move, bringing both sabers down in an overhead smash that would have crushed anything beneath it. Owen wasn't there. He had rolled to Braun's left side, and now his hands shifted position on the longsword. His right hand moved to the blade itself, halfway down its length. His left hand remained on the handle. It was a grip that would have been impossible with an energy weapon, but the longsword was designed for it. This was half-swording, a technique that turned a sword into a precise surgical instrument for fighting armored opponents. Owen used the shortened blade like a lever, attacking the gaps in Braun's armor with mechanical precision. Elbow joint, shoulder joint, neck seal. Each strike was controlled, measured, exploiting the weaknesses that all armor possessed by necessity. The longsword's rigid blade and crossguard allowed him to push, pull, and pry in ways that the flexible practice sabers couldn't match. Braun tried to retaliate, but his advantage had always been his armor and strength. Against an opponent who knew exactly where his armor failed, who fought with techniques designed specifically to defeat heavy protection, his usual tactics became liabilities. That 53 seconds after the match began, Owen's blade touched the exposed section of Braun's neck where the helmet met the chest plate. Hit registered. Victory to competitor Reed. The silence in the arena was deeper this time. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a single fluke victory. This was systematic dismantling of fighting style by someone who understood weaknesses that modern combat had forgotten. After the match, Iris approached Owen in the preparation area. The Quellan scholar moved with careful deliberation, her 6 legs placing her at just the right height to examine the long sword closely. "May I?" she asked, indicating the blade. Owen nodded and held it out horizontally across both palms. Iris studied it without touching, her large eyes taking in every detail. "I've researched your species' pre-space flight history. This weapon is from your feudal period, correct? The design is..." Owen confirmed. "This specific sword was forged 400 years ago, but it's based on patterns that are much older. And you learned to use it from your grandmother. She was the 7th generation keeper in my family. I'm the 8th. Iris circled slowly around him, viewing the sword from every angle. "I understand now. This isn't just a weapon. It's a teaching tool." Owen tilted his head, curious. "The weight forces you to use proper body mechanics," Iris explained, her scholar's mind clearly analyzing what she saw. "The balance point requires correct edge alignment. The sharp edge means you must respect the geometry of every cut. And the techniques you're using, they were developed when making a mistake meant death." "Exactly," Owen said quietly. "Modern practice sabers are wonderful for safety, but they let you develop bad habits. They're too light, too forgiving. You can get away with overextending, telegraphing your moves, leaving openings. Against another practice saber, maybe those mistakes don't matter. But against something real, those mistakes would be fatal," Iris finished. "So your ancestors learned to fight without making them. They didn't have a choice." Iris looked up at Owen with new understanding in her large eyes. "The other students here are learning sword fighting as a sport. You learned it as survival. My grandmother learned it that way," Owen corrected. "She passed that mindset to me." Several other instructors had gathered now, listening to the conversation. One of them, a Keshri named Lev who taught advanced combat theory, spoke up. "But surely modern techniques, developed with better understanding of biomechanics and physics, should be superior to ancient methods." Owen considered the question seriously. "Modern techniques are efficient, but they're designed for modern weapons. My longsword isn't trying to be efficient. It's trying to keep me alive. Every design choice, every technique evolved because the alternative got people killed." He held up the blade, showing them the crossguard. "This isn't decoration. It's for binding an opponent's weapon. These fuller grooves aren't just to reduce weight. They maintain structural integrity while allowing precise cuts. The pommel can be used as a striking weapon. Every part of this sword has a purpose that practice sabers don't need. Because practice sabers don't have to kill," Lev said slowly, understanding dawning. "And they don't have to save lives," Owen added. "This sword does both." Halvik pushed through the crowd of instructors, his bronze scales reflecting irritation. "Your next match is in 1 hour. Semifinals. Your opponent is Cade, a Saurian telekinetic. He doesn't even touch his weapons. How will your ancient techniques handle that?" Owen smiled and began wrapping his long sword in its cloth. "The same way my ancestors handled every unexpected threat. By adapting, by learning, and by trusting in 400 years of accumulated wisdom." He walked away to prepare, leaving the instructors to debate among themselves. Behind him, he heard Iris speaking to the others. "I think we've forgotten something important. We've become so focused on making combat safe that we've lost touch with what makes it effective. The human is about to remind us." Owen's smile widened. His grandmother would have liked Iris. The semifinal match drew a crowd that exceeded the arena's official capacity. Students packed the aisles, sat on steps, and crowded against the railings. Word had spread beyond the academy. Off-duty faculty from other institutions, visiting dignitaries, even a few journalists from Galactic News Services had found their way to the stands. The human with the ancient sword had become the story of the tournament. Owen sat in the preparation chamber with his eyes closed, the long sword resting across his lap. He could hear the crowd noise through the walls, a constant roar of speculation and debate. None of it mattered. His grandmother had taught him to find the quiet place inside himself before a match, the calm center where fear couldn't reach. "They're betting against you," Drev said from the doorway. His roommate had appointed himself unofficial support crew, bringing updates whether Owen wanted them or not. 10-1 odds. The Saurians have won the last 6 tournaments. Nobody thinks you can beat Cade. That's fine, Owen said without opening his eyes. He can control 3 sabers at once without touching them. They move in patterns that don't follow normal physics. How are you going to defend against that? Now Owen opened his eyes. By not relying on my eyes. Drev's confusion was visible in all 3 of his faces. What does that mean? It means my grandmother taught me more than just sword techniques, Owen said, standing and lifting the longsword. She taught me that sight is only one sense, and sometimes it's the one that lies the most. The announcement echoed through the preparation chamber. Semi-final match, Platform 2, competitors report. Owen walked into the arena, and the noise hit him like a physical force. Thousands of voices, countless species, all focused on him and the weapon he carried. He let the sound wash over him without reacting, maintaining the calm his training had built. Cade was already on the platform, and the sight of him was striking. Saurians were tall and thin, their bodies seemingly too delicate to support their height. Cade's skin had a faint luminescent quality, and his eyes were completely black without any visible iris or pupil. Around him, 3 practice sabers floated in the air, spinning slowly in a hypnotic pattern. The Saurian spoke without moving his lips, his voice projecting directly into the minds of everyone nearby. The primitive human. I wondered if you would make it this far. Your luck ends here. Owen didn't respond. He took his position and settled into his guard stance. The longsword held at a middle position where it could attack or defend with equal ease. The referee signaled the start. Cade's 3 sabers exploded into motion. They moved independently, each following a different trajectory, cutting angles that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. One stabbed high while another swept low, the third attacking from the side in a pattern no single opponent with physical weapons could ever create. Owen closed his eyes. The crowd gasped. Students who had been cheering fell silent. Was the human giving up? Had he frozen in fear? But Owen wasn't frozen. His long sword moved, and the first practice saber was deflected. Then the second. Then the third. His blade seemed to know where the attacks were coming from before they arrived, intercepting each strike with minimal motion that he was listening. Every weapon moving through air creates sound. The hum of an energy saber has a frequency, a pitch that changes based on speed and direction. Cade's telekinetic control was impressive, but the sabers still had to obey physics. They still had to move through space. And that movement made noise that Owen's grandmother had made him train blindfolded for months. She had thrown practice swords at him while he stood with eyes covered, teaching him to track weapons by sound and the pressure changes they created in the air. At the time, he had thought it was cruel. Now he understood it was necessary. Cade increased the complexity of his attack. The 3 sabers began moving in intersecting patterns, creating a web of energy that should have been impossible to navigate. Students in the crowd were recording on their personal devices, certain they were about to witness the human's defeat, that Owen's defense remained perfect. More than that, it was becoming simpler. Where before he had moved his whole body to defend, now only his sword moved. Small adjustments, minimal effort, maximum efficiency. He was finding the rhythm beneath Cade's seemingly random pattern. Because it wasn't random. Nothing in combat could be truly random. Every attack required thought, and thought followed patterns. Cade was brilliant, but he was still thinking in conventional terms. High, low, side, diagonal. The directions were predictable even if the timing wasn't. Owen opened his eyes as he stepped forward, his longsword moving in a rising cut that seemed to ignore all three of Cade's floating sabers. The Saurian pulled his weapons back to defend, but Owen's blade wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed at the space where Cade would move his saber to intercept. The longsword caught the practice saber mid-flight and redirected it with a smooth, circular motion that used the energy weapon's own momentum against it. The saber spun away, out of Cade's control range for a crucial second. Owen used that second to press forward. His next cut forced the second saber into a defensive position. The third tried to attack from behind, but Owen was already moving, spinning inside its arc and bringing his longsword up in a thrust that stopped just short of Cade's chest. The Saurian froze, his three sabers falling still in the air. Hit registered. Victory to competitor Reed. The arena didn't erupt this time. It exploded. The noise was deafening, species arguing and cheering and demanding explanations in 100 different languages. Owen stepped back and bowed to Cade. The same respectful gesture he had offered his previous opponents. Cade's voice touched his mind. Quieter now. Thoughtful. How did you do that? My attacks have no pattern. I specifically designed them to be unpredictable. Everything has a pattern, Owen replied out loud. Even randomness follows rules. My grandmother taught me to find those rules. By closing your eyes, by listening, by feeling, by trusting in techniques that were old before your species reached the stars. Owen lifted his long sword slightly. This blade has been teaching my family for 400 years. Every fight, every training session, every mistake and victory gets passed down. I'm not just fighting with a sword. I'm fighting with the accumulated experience of everyone who held it before me. Cade studied the long sword with new appreciation. I understand now. We practice with weapons we can replace. You practice with history, with legacy. Owen corrected gently as he walked off the platform to find Iris waiting for him, along with a crowd of instructors and students. The Quellen scholar's eyes were bright with excitement. The finals are tomorrow, she said. Your opponent will be Petra, the Hescaran champion. She has won the tournament 3 years in a row. She fights with 4 sabers simultaneously and has never been defeated. Owen nodded, unsurprised. I've watched her matches. Can you beat her? Owen looked down at the long sword in his hands, seeing the small scratches and where marks that told the story of its history. Somewhere in those marks was the experience of every fighter who had wielded this blade, every lesson his grandmother had passed down, every principle that had kept humans alive when a single mistake meant death. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'm going to honor my family's tradition by trying. Iris smiled, an expression that looked strange on her alien features, but was somehow universal in its meaning. Tomorrow, the entire galaxy will be watching. You've already proven that ancient wisdom has value. Now prove that it can prevail. Owen returned to his quarters that evening and spent an hour in meditation with a long sword across his lap. Tomorrow would be the hardest fight of his life. But his grandmother had trained him for exactly this moment. Even if she had never known it would come, he slept well that night. The sleep of someone who knows they have done their best and will do so again tomorrow. The championship match was scheduled for noon, but the arena had been full since dawn. Students had camped overnight to secure good viewing positions. The galactic news feeds were carrying live coverage. In bars and common rooms across a dozen worlds, people gathered to watch the human with the ancient sword face the undefeated champion. Owen arrived early and found a quiet corner beneath the stands. He performed his pre-match ritual, checking the blade for any imperfections, testing the edge, examining the handle wrapping. Everything was perfect. The sword had survived 4 centuries and countless fights. It would survive one more. Drev found him there, carrying water and looking more nervous than Owen felt. The betting has shifted. 3-1 now instead of 10-1. People are starting to believe you might actually have a chance. That's kind of them, Owen said, continuing his inspection. Petra has fought 27 championship matches and won all of them. She's faster than Tess, stronger than Braun, and more experienced than Cade. She's everything you've faced combined into one opponent. Owen looked up at his roommate and smiled. I know. I've been studying her matches for the past month. The announcement came. Championship match, Main platform, competitors report immediately. The walk from the preparation area to the platform felt longer than it was. Owen could hear his heart beating, could feel the weight of the long sword in his hands, could sense the attention of thousands of beings focused entirely on him. This was it. The final test of everything his grandmother had taught him. Petra was already on the platform, and she was magnificent. The Hescaran stood 7 feet tall with 4 arms, each one holding a practice saber that glowed with perfect blue light. Her movements were fluid and controlled, warming up with forms that showed decades of mastery. When she saw Owen, she nodded with genuine respect. "The human who has surprised us all," she said, her voice deep and resonant. "I have watched your matches. You fight well, but I have been champion for 3 years because I adapt to every style, every technique, every opponent. Your ancient methods are impressive, but they will not be enough." "Maybe not," Owen admitted, "but I owe it to my family to try." Halvik himself served as referee for the championship match. The Torgon's bronze scales gleamed as he stood between the 2 fighters, and his voice carried across the arena without amplification. "This match will be fought to 5 registered hits or submission. Fighters ready." Owen settled into his guard stance, long sword held in the center position. Petra spread her 4 arms, each saber moving in an independent pattern that was hypnotic to watch. "Begin." Petra attacked like a storm, her sabers moving in coordinated chaos, high and low and left and right, creating patterns that should have been impossible to defend against. She was everything Drev had said and more. Fast like Tess, strong like Braun, unpredictable like Cade, all combined with the experience of years at the top of galactic competition. Owen gave ground, his longsword moving in simple defensive patterns that his grandmother had drilled into him 10,000 times. Block, parry, redirect. Block, parry, redirect. Every movement was minimal. Every motion conserved energy. Because he had learned Petra's secret from watching her matches. She was brilliant, but she fought with the assumption that practice sabers could be replaced. She overextended because there was no cost to it. She committed to attacks because the worst that could happen was losing a point. She had learned to fight in a world where mistakes were temporary setbacks. Owen had learned to fight in a world where mistakes were fatal. The match continued, Owen defending, Petra attacking. Minutes passed. The crowd was screaming, but Owen barely heard them. He was watching the pattern, finding the rhythm beneath the chaos. Petra was rotating her attacks, each arm taking turns leading while the other supported. It was efficient, but it was predictable once you understood it. 0.5 minutes into the match, Petra's attacks began to slow. Not much, just a fraction of a second delay between combinations. For sabers required constant motion, constant energy. Owen's single longsword required only precision and patience. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Patience defeats power. Always. Owen stopped retreating. He stepped forward into Petra's next attack, his longsword moving in a figure-8 pattern that intercepted 2 of her sabers simultaneously. The binding technique his grandmother had taught him, using the crossguard to trap multiple blades at once. Petra tried to pull back, but the physics were wrong. The longsword's weight and leverage gave Owen mechanical advantage. He rotated his wrists, and suddenly all 4 of her practice sabers were controlled by a single blade. The ancient sword's design allowed techniques that modern weapons couldn't replicate. For one perfect moment, Owen held all of Petra's weapons immobile. Then he stepped inside her guard and placed the tip of his long sword against her chest, right over her heart. The arena went absolutely silent. "Hit registered," Halvik said, his voice carefully neutral. "Score 1-0, Reed." Petra stepped back, her 4 eyes wide with surprise. "How did you do that?" 400 years of refinement," Owen said. "This sword was designed to fight multiple opponents at once. Its whole purpose was to keep one person alive against many enemies." They reset. The match continued. Now Petra fought more carefully, respecting the longsword's capabilities. But careful meant slow, and slow meant Owen could dictate the pace. He began to counterattack, his blade finding gaps in her defense that modern training didn't account for. The second hit came from a thrust that used distance management techniques developed in real duels. The third hit came from a cut that exploited the momentary imbalance when Petra switched her attack pattern. The fourth hit came from a bind that trapped 3 sabers while the longsword's pommel struck the fourth. Score 4-0 to Petra was breathing hard now, all 4 arms showing signs of fatigue. Owen's breath was steady, controlled. The longsword's weight had been teaching him endurance since he was 12 years old. The final exchange lasted 3 seconds. Petra committed to an all-out attack, throwing everything she had into one overwhelming assault. Owen stepped forward instead of back, moving into the attack rather than away from it. His longsword rose in a diagonal cut that passed between all 4 of her sabers, using angles that shouldn't have been possible but were, because ancient swords masters had mapped every possible angle centuries ago. The blade touched Petra's shoulder. Hit registered. Victory to competitor Reed. New tournament champion. The arena exploded into noise, but Owen barely heard it. He was looking at Petra, offering her the same respectful bow he had given every opponent. Petra returned the bow, all 4 arms moving in a gesture of acknowledgement. You have taught me something today, human. I forgot that my weapons are tools. You remember that yours is history. The award ceremony was formal and traditional. Owen stood on the platform as Iris placed the championship medal around his neck. Then he asked for permission to speak, and the crowd fell silent. I want to thank all my opponents for honoring my family's tradition with their effort and skill, Owen began. But I also want to say something important. This isn't about me being better than anyone else. It's about remembering what we've lost. He held up the longsword. Before practice sabers and safety protocols, warriors trained knowing their lives depended on their skill. They developed techniques that assumed death was the price of failure. Modern training methods are wonderful for keeping people safe, but we've forgotten the wisdom that came from that danger. Owen looked at the tournament officials. I propose we create a traditional weapons division. Let students learn ancient combat forms from all our species. Not to replace modern methods, but to preserve the knowledge that our ancestors paid for with their blood. Iris stepped forward. The Academy accepts this proposal. Owen Reed will help establish a program teaching historical combat techniques from various species. Applications will open next semester. The crowd approved with cheers from dozens of species. That evening, Owen found himself in the Academy's largest training hall, surrounded by students who wanted to learn. Drev was there, holding a practice version of a human longsword and looking determined. So were Tess, Braun, Cade, and even Petra. They all wanted to understand what they had witnessed. Owen demonstrated a basic cutting form, and his students tried to mirror him. Their movements were rough, uncertain, but honest. He corrected stances gently, adjusted grips, and explained the reasoning behind each technique. The ancient longsword hung on the wall behind him, displayed in honor, but no longer alone. Beside it hung practice weapons from a dozen worlds, each representing a martial tradition that deserved to be remembered. Drev approached after the class, sweating and tired. This is harder than I thought. These techniques require so much precision. That's because they're designed for real combat, Owen said. In a real fight, close enough isn't good enough. You have to be exactly right. Your grandmother must have been an amazing teacher. Owen looked at the long sword on the wall, seeing his reflection in its dark metal. She was. And now I get a pass on what she taught me. That's the real victory here, not the championship. This. He gestured at the students practicing ancient forms, representing a dozen species, all learning that there was value in remembering the past. His grandmother would have been proud. The sword would continue to teach, as it had for 400 years, as it would for 400 more. Because some traditions were worth preserving. Some knowledge was worth fighting for. And sometimes the old ways were the best ways after all.